Hey everybody, today we're talking about low iron and the impacts that it has on your energy and your mood. Now you may not realize it, but low iron is also related to anxiety and depression, so we're going to talk about that today too. As always, I like my videos to be super practical, so today I'm going to give you lots of tips for managing your low iron, and I also want to talk about some things that other YouTubers aren't talking about. So we're going to cover things like how iron impacts your heart, and we're also going to talk about something that I call your monthly energy cycle. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Melanie from Female Fitness Systems, and on this channel we talk about fitness, nutrition, and longevity. And low iron is definitely a part of aging. It's something that a lot of women struggle with, so that's why we're talking about it today. It's also a topic that's very near and dear to me because since about 2014, which was when I first had my iron levels tested, I've really struggled with low iron. My ferritin, which is a measure of your iron, ranges from anywhere from about 6 to 22. For those of you who know about iron testing, you'll know that's very low. 22 is the highest I can manage to get it up to throughout the month. And the reason I struggle so much is because I have a fibroid and heavy periods, and those heavy periods are getting worse as I get older. So for me, getting my iron levels up every month is a constant battle, and it's something that I've put a lot of thought and research into. So I'm hoping what I share with you today is very helpful in helping you manage your own low iron. One more thing before we get started, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of supplementation in this video. This is more about the side effects of low iron, but you really should get your supplementation right. And I have an awesome blog post, which is like your ultimate guide to iron supplementation. It just covers absolutely everything you need to know about getting your iron supplements right. I'm going to link to that blog post in the description of this video, and you should definitely check it out after watching. So let's get started by talking about the fatigue and the whole energy side of iron, and then after that we'll get into the anxiety and depression and the mood effects of low iron. Now, if you are somebody who has iron deficiency, you're gonna know how awful it feels, but there are some women out there who don't actually realize that they are low in iron, so I wanted to quickly run you through what it feels like when your iron is running low. So for a lot of women, it's going to feel like you've got brain fog. I describe it as your brain not fully booting through the day, like you just feel sluggish, and I mean, you know what brain fog feels like. And then it can often also come with a low-level headache. It won't be like a throbbing migraine style headache, but it'll just feel like a dull kind of ache. That's another sign that your iron is low. And then the other thing that could happen is that you might find that you need a lot of sleep. Like you're gonna feel like sleeping all the time, especially in the afternoons, and that brain fog is really bad, but you're also gonna feel like it's really hard to get out of bed. For me, when my iron is at its lowest, I can wake up, but then I'm back asleep, and it can happen like 5 or 6 times before I finally drag myself out of bed. I also sleep really hard when my iron is low. Ironically, it's when I have my best sleep. So that's like the one plus of having low iron, is I have really amazing sleeps. And it's the only time in the month when I can sleep through Greg getting up and making coffee and making noise in the kitchen, because I'm just so absolutely knocked out to the world. So that's what it feels like to have low iron. There's also going to be some impacts on your ability to exercise, because if in the day-to-day you feel that awful, trying to exercise is going to be really difficult. And for a lot of women, it's actually impossible. We're going to talk about exercise in a couple of minutes. But before we get into exercise, I wanted to talk a little bit about the impacts of low iron on your heart, because while a lot of you are aware of how it feels to have low iron, you may not realize that it actually has some pretty serious implications for your heart. And this is because your heart is actually having to work harder when your iron is low to pump the oxygen around your body to your muscles and your tissues. And there's actually some studies that show that in the long run, there can be structural changes to your heart and even some Risks of stroke. So there are some very serious side effects of having low iron for a long time, and I wanted to raise that in this video because it's not something that a lot of you are aware of. You will know it intuitively though, because for a lot of you who have really low iron, you might find that you often get very out of breath. For example, in my old house, I had 2 flights of stairs, and when my iron was really low, I would often get super out of breath by the time I got to the top of the stairs, and I would often have to sit down because I would start to go dizzy and almost passing out. And that's a sign of that low iron and that heart working really hard. The other thing that absolutely freaks me out, which some of you may be experiencing, is that when my iron is at its lowest, when I'm lying down in bed sometimes at night, I can actually feel my heart thumping in my head. It's quite hard to describe, but for those of you who've felt it, you're gonna know what I'm talking about. And again, this is a sign that your heart is working really hard to pump that oxygen around your body. And it's one of those things about low iron that gives me a lot of anxiety. I'm worried about the long-term effects on my heart, and especially as I get older and my periods get worse and it gets harder to keep my iron levels topped up. And so I'm sharing it with you in the hopes that it gives you some motivation to really stay on top of your iron, to try to keep it up as much as possible throughout the month, but also to cut yourself some slack when it comes to exercising as well, because when your heart is in that position of really struggling, when your iron is at its lowest throughout the month, I think anything that gets your heart rate up is just not going to feel good. And I'm not a doctor, but just intuitively, it doesn't seem to me that you should be doing things like cardio and pushing yourself really hard when your iron is at its lowest. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about today was something I call your monthly energy cycle. If you're a woman who has regular periods, that's probably the reason that you have low iron. It's that blood loss every month. And for a lot of you, especially in your 40s, you know that it's a constant battle to get your iron up every month, because as those periods get worse, which they often do as we get older, it just gets harder and harder to play catch up every month, because every time you have a period, your iron tanks. And with that, your energy also tanks. So along with your monthly cycle, you're gonna have an energy cycle where that energy is really low during your period and after your period. And then throughout the month, if you're really good with your supplementation, you'll slowly build up your iron and your energy will slowly build up as well. And that's what I call your monthly energy cycle. And I think this is really important because I'm actually now planning my training around my monthly energy as well, because it goes back to what we just talked about in terms of your heart health. There's just some things you're not going to be able to do when your iron is really low. And for me, it often means that even once my period finishes, I can't go straight back into training. And if I do, I'm certainly not going to go as hard as I would when my iron levels are better. And so for me, what I've been doing is slowly ramping my training up over the month, slowly ramping up the intensity of it as my energy and my iron levels also increase. So I have this monthly energy or this monthly training cycle. And I think this is something that's really important to consider. It's something I wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about. If you are interested in it, please do let me know in the comments, and I'll make a whole separate video on the topic. Leave me questions, leave me comments, because it's really important for me to know what you're thinking and what you want to hear more about. So just to recap so far, we've talked about the fatigue and the low energy, and then this monthly energy cycle, and the idea of possibly planning your training around it. But not only your training, you might also want to plan important events around it as well, big meetings at work or presentations and that sort of thing, because when your iron is really low, it's going to be hard for you to give your best in things like your work and your family and your social life and all of that stuff as well. So now I want to turn to the anxiety and depression side of iron, because I think this is something that not as many people are talking about. So the research is fairly clear that having low iron is associated with higher feelings of anxiety and depression. And once those iron levels are corrected through supplements, your feelings of anxiety and depression are lessened, and your ratings of quality of life and just how you feel about things go up. It's quite frustrating to know this, because for a lot of us, there's not a lot we can do when our iron levels keep getting knocked out every month by heavy periods. But I wanted to mention this because hopefully it helps you be easier on yourself and just understand that you may also have a cycle with your anxiety and depression. For example, I've found that on my heaviest period days and the days afterwards when my iron is really low, I often will have episodes where I have a little meltdown about just the tiniest of things, and I get what I call weepy, like where I just start crying about the littlest of things. I get really irrational and absolutely just ridiculous. And it happens like clockwork when my iron is at its lowest. And it's really helpful to know that this might be going on, because you can bring your loved ones on board. My partner now understands this cycle, and so when I get into one of these moments, he will gently remind me that perhaps the whole world isn't crashing down, and that maybe I'm not viewing it as rationally as possible because it's the low iron time of the month. And we often end up laughing about it, because I'll realize how ridiculous I'm being and that I just can't get a grip. But it is an extremely frustrating thing. And in fact, I wonder how much different of a person I might be if my iron levels were normal. Because if my iron levels have been low since 2014, like, I'm not a super anxious person, but there has been a lot of anxiety and feelings of sadness along the way. And it just makes you wonder, can you trust your feelings, or, is what you're experiencing due to the low iron? It's extremely frustrating, and I wanted to share that with you today to hopefully help you cut yourself some slack, but also give you some strategies to manage it yourself. And I do think definitely bringing your loved ones on board is absolutely key, because it can be really frustrating for them as well, dealing with your moods. So it's just really important that everybody knows what's going on so that you can all manage it together. So I hope you found some of this helpful today, and you've got some ideas for managing your own low iron. I really wanted you to understand that you're not alone in this. So many women struggle with it. It's something that, especially in your 40s, when those periods can get really wicked, becomes a real issue for a lot of women. And it's really important that you get on top of your iron supplementation as much as possible. So definitely check out that blog post that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. It really does cover absolutely everything you need to know about supplements, including what to do if you don't like the prescription supplements, and all the potential things that can block iron supplements, because iron supplementation is so tricky. So check that one out. I'll link to it in the description of this video. As always, leave me questions in the comments. Let me know what you'd like to learn more about, including if you want to hear more about that monthly training cycle that I've talked about today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.